Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Stories like this only keep coming because of you, and trust me, you won't want to miss how this one ends. You're about to hear the kind of story that doesn't leave you easily. Tommy DeSimone wasn't just a name in Brooklyn, he was a shadow that moved faster than most men could think. Thin, tall, always sharp in a suit, he had a smile that could pass for charm, until you saw the steel hiding behind it. He was the kind of man who made you laugh one minute and made you fear for your life the next. I remember the story everyone told about that diner on a winter morning. The place smelled like Burke coffee and fried eggs, with a radio hissing static in the corner. Jimmy Burke was spinning some tale, Henry Hill half listening, when a young kid walked in, mouthing off, trying to prove he wasn't scared of anyone. It was the kind of harmless noise you'd usually ignore. Tommy didn't ignore it. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. He just reached under his coat, pulled out his .38, and fired once. The crack of the gun snapped through the greasy air. The kid dropped before anyone could blink. The diner went silent. The clock ticked on like nothing happened. Tommy sipped his coffee, set the cup down, and said flatly, "Coffee's cold." That was it. No grand speech. Just another moment that stamped his reputation deeper into the streets. People liked to say Tommy was crazy. They were wrong. Crazy is unpredictable. Tommy was consistent. He believed in one rule: you don't let disrespect breathe. In our world, respect was a bill you paid every day, and fear was the best currency. He knew that better than anyone. He could slap you on the back, call you brother, and for a moment you'd feel safe. But even in that moment, you'd check your locks twice when you got home. From the start, Tommy had been surrounded by men who measured loyalty in blood. His brothers were tied into the life, his family steeped in it. Paul Vario's crew gave him his first real chance. Paul needed muscle, someone who didn't hesitate, and Tommy was born without a brake pedal. Small hijackings led to bigger jobs. Truckloads of cigarettes, booze, anything they could move. Jimmy Burke handled the charm, Henry Hill handled the hustle, but Tommy was the iron fist. If Jimmy was the brain and Henry the mouth, Tommy was the raw nerve that made things happen fast. It was fear that carried him further than money ever could. And he understood that better than most. One strike in a diner was enough to make his name echo in whispers across boroughs. "That's Tommy," people would say, their voices dropping low. Not because they wanted to keep it secret, but because even speaking his name too loud felt dangerous. And this was only the beginning. Brooklyn in the 70s was no place for hesitation. Every block belonged to someone, every bar had eyes on it, and every whisper carried a name. The streets were maps of invisible lines, and crossing the wrong one could get you buried in an unmarked grave. Tommy walked those lines like they didn't exist. He wasn't the biggest man, not the smartest either, but he carried himself like he had a permanent pass. People gave him space because they knew, if you stepped wrong around him, you didn't get a second chance. Jimmy Burke liked having him around. Jimmy was all smooth talk and long cons, the kind of guy who could steal a truckload of liquor and have the drivers thank him afterward. But even he knew charm alone didn't keep you safe. That's where Tommy came in. Henry Hill, younger and always hustling, tried to balance the crew, talking fast, patching holes. But when Tommy decided something was finished, nobody argued. If Jimmy was the brain and Henry the mouth, Tommy was the fist that made people believe both. The thing about Tommy was that he didn't just use violence, he performed it. Take the night in the Bronx when they hit a jewelry store. It was supposed to be a quick grab. In and out, easy. But the owner, a proud man with too much backbone, reached for a bat behind the counter. Most guys would have waved a gun, told him to drop it. Not Tommy. He snatched up a hammer and brought it down on the man's hand. The crack was sharp, sickening, echoing against glass cases filled with rings. The man screamed, clutching what used to be fingers. Tommy leaned in close, his voice calm as if he were giving advice: "Stay in your lane." That line followed him longer than the jewels they stole. That was his method: make it brutal, make it unforgettable, make it spread. A black eye healed, a broken rib faded, but the memory of Tommy's calm voice after breaking your hand? That stayed forever. He knew stories were more powerful than fists. Fear was more reliable than money. That's how his legend grew. But legends cast shadows. Every time Tommy walked into a bar, heads turned and eyes followed. Some stares were respect. Others were hate. And some belonged to men waiting for the right moment to even the score. The Gambinos in particular, they never forgot Billy Bats. They didn't talk about it, but their silence was heavy. Revenge in that world wasn't fast. It was patient, the kind of patience that made men wake up sweating years later. Tommy brushed it off, joked about it, but even the bravest men around him felt the chill. Still, he carried on as if he had no enemies. Maybe he believed his own myth. Maybe he just didn't care. To Tommy, slowing down wasn't living. He lived like every day was his last, and maybe in the back of his mind, he knew one day it would be. The heat of summer didn't slow Tommy down, it only made him louder. Brooklyn bars were ovens with smoke trapped under low ceilings, but Tommy strutted in like he owned the air itself. He'd toss his jacket on a chair, light a cigarette, and deal cards with a grin that told everyone he was in control. People looked at him and saw two choices: laugh along with him, or end up part of a story nobody wanted to star in. Henry said it best once: Tommy was like a firecracker in a glass jar. You never knew if he'd light himself, or light you. Jimmy, older and sharper, tried to rein him in. He'd pull Tommy aside after one of his explosions, whispering, "You don't have to kill every insult." Tommy would shrug, that crooked grin curling. Why let it live? That was Tommy's rule in plain words. To him, letting someone get away with disrespect was like letting a disease spread. The Spider story burned that truth into everyone's mind. Spider was just a kid, a bartender trying to stand tall in a room full of killers. One night, he was too slow with drinks, so Tommy pulled his piece and shot him in the foot. The crew laughed nervously, shaking off the tension. A week later, the kid came back limping, bandage showing, trying to be brave. When Tommy mocked him again, Spider talked back. The air froze. Tommy didn't shout. Didn't threaten. He just stood, raised his gun, and fired. The shot echoed off the walls. Spider crumpled. Nobody moved. Jimmy looked down at the floor like it was nothing. Henry sat stiff, pale. Tommy slid back into his chair, tapped the table, and said, "Deal me in." That line spread like wildfire. Not because it was clever, but because of the casual way he said it. It turned a killing into policy, into theater. The story traveled across boroughs faster than trucks on the expressway. Suddenly, "Don't be Spider" became code for keeping your mouth shut. Tommy didn't just kill a kid, he branded a rule into the street. And that's what set him apart. Other guys hid their violence, whispered threats in alleys. Tommy put it center stage. He wanted the story told. Every beating, every bullet, was part of the legend he was building. He didn't just want people to fear him, he wanted them to remember him. But legends make men nervous. Paul Vario watched him carefully, pride mixed with unease. Jimmy used him when fear was more valuable than finesse, but even he started to worry about the trail Tommy left behind. Henry, always half in and half out, saw the way other guys stared at Tommy, not just with fear, but with the kind of look men give when they're waiting for a storm to burn itself out. Still, Tommy walked tall, suit flashing in neon lights, voice loud enough to fill rooms. He was untouchable, or at least, he carried himself like he was. And the more untouchable he looked, the more people whispered about how long it could really last. By the time the air cooled in the fall, Tommy's name was being passed around like a cautionary tale. Guys in Queens pool halls, Bronx card rooms, even across the bridge in Jersey, everywhere you went, people had a Tommy story. That's the one who shot Spider. That's the guy who cracked a jeweler's hand like it was nothing. He was becoming less of a man and more of a shadow people tried not to bump into. Then came the night with Billy Bats. Billy was Gambino, just out of prison, back in a bar full of smoke and laughter. He was older, heavier, feeling himself again after doing time. The drinks were flowing, the jukebox humming, when he turned his attention to Tommy. A joke about shining shoes, about Tommy's old days as a nobody. Men chuckled. The kind of ribbing that should have rolled off. But Tommy's smile froze. His eyes turned flat, and you could almost hear the mood shift, like a needle skipping on a record. Hours later, when the bar had thinned, the air went thick. Billy leaned back in his chair, still grinning, when Tommy lunged. Fists, boots, the room filled with the sound of bone hitting wood, then bone hitting bone. Jimmy and Henry joined in, the three of them stomping until the laughter turned into silence. Billy was left crumpled, blood soaking into the sticky floorboards. Killing a made man without permission? That was a line you didn't cross. But Tommy didn't believe in lines. Respect to him was worth more than rules, and Billy had disrespected him in front of a crowd. That was enough. They stuffed Billy into the trunk of a car, the smell of iron filling the air. Driving out to bury him, they had to pull over when the trunk started thumping. Billy wasn't dead yet. Tommy opened it, eyes blazing, and without a flicker of hesitation, emptied the gun into him. Henry sat frozen in the back seat, watching the smoke drift out of the barrel. Jimmy lit a cigarette like it was just another ride through Queens. Tommy slammed the trunk shut and muttered, "Now he's quiet." The hole was shallow, the dirt cold. They buried Billy under the cover of dark, hands raw, breath short, the night silent except for the scrape of shovels. But in our world, bodies didn't stay buried forever. Billy wasn't just another score, he was family to powerful men. That grave was nothing but a ticking clock. After that, Tommy's shadow grew darker. He laughed louder, walked taller, but every man in the crew knew what it meant. Killing Billy Batts had signed his death warrant. The Gambinos weren't loud about it, but their silence was worse. It carried the weight of inevitability. Revenge in that life wasn't fast. It was patient. It waited for the right time. Still, Tommy didn't slow down. He treated the danger like a dare, carrying himself like a man who thought his legend could shield him. But legends don't stop bullets, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before someone came to collect. After Billy Batts, the air around Tommy changed. He still laughed, still strutted into bars like he owned the floor, but men noticed the pauses in conversations when he entered. The Gambinos didn't shout about revenge, but their silence spoke louder than bullets. Everyone knew it was coming, but Tommy acted like he was the one in control of time itself. The cops started circling too. Detectives compared notes, connecting robberies, beatings, bodies that turned up without answers. And in every conversation, one name crept back: tall kid, sharp suits, short fuse. But fear worked better than alibis. Witnesses forgot what they saw. Bartenders looked the other way. Guys with bruises swore they'd fallen downstairs. Silence was Tommy's best defense, and silence came easy when people thought opening their mouths meant ending up in a trunk. Still, his recklessness didn't sit right with everyone. Jimmy Burke needed Tommy's muscle, sometimes fear closed deals faster than charm ever could. But even Jimmy's patience wore thin. He once muttered to Henry, "Tommy acts like cops don't exist." Henry just nodded, because he knew Jimmy wasn't wrong. One night in Queens proved it again. They boxed in a bookmaker's car at a red light. The guy had been stalling on a debt, claiming business was slow. Tommy yanked him out by the collar and laid him across the hood. Fists came down until the man's blood smeared shiny across the paint. People on the sidewalk stopped and stared, but Tommy didn't care. He lit a cigarette right there, exhaling smoke while the man gasped for air. "Friday," he said, voice calm, like he was scheduling a meeting. Then he tossed the guy onto the pavement, climbed back into the car, and drove off. By morning, the story had already spread, and the bookmaker's debt was paid in full. Tommy wasn't just violent, he was ambitious. Small jobs weren't enough anymore. Hijacking trucks, shaking down corner stores, even killing over insults, they all felt like warm-ups. He wanted the kind of score that carved his name into the bones of the city. So when Jimmy started whispering about a job at the airport, Tommy leaned in close. Lufthansa. Millions in unmarked bills. Maybe the biggest score the mob had ever touched. From that moment, Tommy's energy shifted. Every hijack, every shakedown became rehearsal for something bigger. He started imagining a life built on that money, cars that turned heads, silk suits from Italy, maybe even a house in Florida. He laughed about it at bars, his voice carrying over the music, but Henry noticed the edge beneath it. Tommy wasn't just dreaming, he was hungering. But hunger makes men careless. The more Tommy fed his legend, the more the city wanted to see him fall. The cops wanted him caged. The Gambinos wanted him buried. And even some of his own started to wonder whether being close to Tommy meant sitting beside a man with a ticking clock strapped to his chest. By the time whispers of the Lufthansa score started spreading, Tommy was restless. Smaller jobs no longer excited him. Hijacking trucks, leaning on gamblers, shaking down shopkeepers, it all felt like pocket change compared to the millions waiting inside JFK. Jimmy was careful, laying out the plan piece by piece, using inside contacts, double-checking every angle. But patience wasn't in Tommy's blood. He wanted the night to come, the vault to open, the bags of cash in his hands. While Jimmy planned, Tommy stayed busy the only way he knew. One winter evening, a gambler tried stalling, swearing his money would come next week. Tommy grabbed him, slammed him face first into a brick wall, and pressed the cold steel of his pistol to the back of his head. Blood smeared against the bricks, dripping down slow. Friday, Tommy whispered, calm as a man setting an appointment. Then he let the guy stumble off, broken nose gushing, his dignity gone. Henry, watching from the curb, shook his head. It wasn't the violence that unsettled him, it was how casual Tommy made it, like breaking a man's face was no different than paying for lunch. At the Bamboo Lounge, their unofficial headquarters, smoke filled the air so thick it clung to your clothes. Nights there were filled with card games, quiet deals, and music humming low in the background. Tommy loved the place because it gave him an audience. One night, Frenchie, a small-timer who ran errands for the crew, skimmed a little off the top. Tommy dragged him into the bathroom, shoved his head into the toilet, and held it down until the bubbles stopped. When he yanked him back up, gasping and soaked, Tommy leaned close and said, "Don't ever steal from me." Frenchie stumbled out drenched, and word spread through the lounge like smoke through vents. After that, no one even thought about crossing him. Meanwhile, Jimmy's plan tightened. The inside man, Louis Werner, was deep in gambling debts and had every reason to sell information. He gave them schedules, vault details, guard routines, everything they needed. Jimmy laid down rules: no bragging, no big purchases afterward, no mistakes. Everyone nodded, but even then, they all looked at Tommy. He could agree to anything in the moment, but whether he'd follow through was another question. As the weeks ticked closer to December, the crew felt like a live wire. Jimmy carried himself calm, focused. Henry stayed watchful, nervous but loyal. Tommy couldn't hide his excitement. He talked about cars, about suits, about a new house with palm trees. He laughed like the money was already in his pocket. "Why play small?" he told Henry once, "when we're about to own the sky?" But big dreams bring big shadows. Every rehearsal job, every whispered plan, every night spent sharpening the edges of the heist carried weight. Men in this life knew that big scores didn't just make you rich, they put you on everyone's radar. The cops, the feds, the bosses, even your own friends. Tommy didn't care. To him, risk was just the price of becoming unforgettable. December 11th, 1978, was the kind of night that froze everything it touched. Breath turned into smoke, tires squealed against ice, and the city seemed half asleep under the cold. For most people, it was just another Monday. For Jimmy's crew, it was the night that could rewrite their lives. Tommy sat in the lead van, ski mask on his lap, gloves pulled tight. His leg bounced restlessly against the floorboard, not from nerves but from the rush he lived for. This was the job he'd been waiting on, the one big enough to make him more than just feared. The signal came quick and clean. Their man inside had everything lined up, guards thin, schedules tight, the vault waiting. The van eased into place, headlights low, engine humming like a heartbeat. 6 men moved out like shadows, their boots crunching soft against the icy pavement. Tommy was the first to grab a guard, slamming him against the wall, the cold barrel of his gun pressing into his chest. His voice was steady, almost casual. "Don't make me repeat myself." The guard dropped to his knees without a sound. Within minutes, the rest of the guards were corralled in a corner, duct tape across their mouths, hands bound. Their eyes were wide with the kind of fear that never fades. Some prayed silently, some stared at the floor, all of them knowing they were staring at the wrong end of history. Tommy crouched near one, whispering, "You didn't see nothing. You didn't hear nothing. You didn't even work tonight." The man nodded so fast it looked like his neck might snap. Then came the vault. Heavy steel, locked tight, the kind of door that had laughed at would-be thieves for years. But with the inside man's details, their safecracker worked fast. The silence in that moment was heavy, the only sounds the faint creak of tools and the nervous breaths of men waiting to become legends. Then a click, a groan of metal, and the door swung open. What waited inside was enough to steal the air from their lungs. Stacks of cash. Millions in unmarked bills, bundled tight in plastic. Bags of jewels and gold piled like treasure from another world. Even hardened men who'd seen more than their share of riches stopped for a second. Tommy didn't. He lunged forward, filling duffel bags with handfuls of grain, eyes lit up like a man holding his future. The weight of the bags over his shoulder was more satisfying than anything he'd ever carried. In less than an hour, it was done. No alarms, no gunshots, no bodies, just vans pulling away into the night, history riding in the back. Tommy sat with bags at his feet, the smell of money thick in the air, grinning like a man who thought he'd beaten the world. For a moment, he let himself imagine it: new cars, silk suits, maybe even that house in Florida with palm trees out front. A future painted in green. Back at the warehouse, the crew regrouped. Jimmy's grin said it all. They had pulled off the biggest cash robbery in American history. Bottles cracked, glasses raised. But Jimmy's rules were clear: no big purchases, no flash, no mistakes. Tommy nodded along, but his eyes already told another story. Sitting on millions without touching it? That wasn't Tommy's style. And sooner or later, it was going to show. By the time the sun rose, the whole underworld was buzzing. 5 million in cash and nearly 1 million in jewels gone without a trace. Before the papers even hit doorsteps, whispers were racing through bars and back rooms. Jimmy Burke's crew had pulled the impossible. Tommy woke late that morning, the taste of whiskey still on his tongue, the smell of money still in his head. For him, it wasn't just a score. It was a crown. Jimmy had made it clear: lay low. No new toys, no cars, no jewelry, no sudden shows of wealth. The feds would be circling, every agent in New York looking for cracks. The trick was to look ordinary. But Tommy never did ordinary. At first, he played along. He showed up at the Bamboo Lounge, joked with the guys, kept his moves quiet. But his eyes betrayed him, restless, hungry, itching to prove he'd won. It didn't take long for him to break the rules. A week later, at a Christmas party, Tommy strutted in with a mink coat over his arm and a diamond necklace sparkling around his wife's neck. The room went silent when Jimmy spotted him. It wasn't admiration, it was fury. That coat wasn't fashion, it was a beacon. The kind of thing that screamed to the feds, "Look here." Jimmy tore into him later, hissing through clenched teeth, "What did I say? You trying to put me in the chair?" Tommy shrugged, smirking. "Relax. Nobody's talking." But people were watching. The FBI was already swarming around the airport, shaking down guards, grilling anyone with even a whisper of a connection. And inside the crew, paranoia grew like mold. Big scores brought heat, and heat brought suspicion. Before long, bodies started to drop. Guys who bought flashy cars, guys who ran their mouths, guys who couldn't stop celebrating, they vanished one by one. Jimmy was trimming fat, making sure nobody lived long enough to spill. Tommy didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he noticed and didn't care. He stayed loud, stayed visible, bar fights, wild spending, laughing in rooms where everyone else was keeping their heads down. Henry said being around him felt like sitting in a car with a stick of dynamite on the passenger seat. Every move Tommy made dared someone to strike the match. And then there were the Gambinos. Billy Bats hadn't been forgotten. Revenge in that world didn't come fast, it came slow, quiet, patient. Every so often, one of their guys would linger in a doorway too long, eyes fixed on Tommy, letting him know the debt was still open. Tommy laughed it off, cracked jokes, acted untouchable. But Henry noticed moments when the grin slipped, when Tommy's eyes gave away the truth. Deep down, he knew the clock was ticking. Paul Vario saw it too. For years, he had vouched for Tommy, using his fire when it served him. Now, even Paul started to wonder if Tommy's blaze was burning too close to the family. Jimmy still kept him close, but the loyalty was cracking under the weight of fear. Everyone felt it, the walls were closing in. The Lufthansa heist had made them legends. But legends cast long shadows, and Tommy was walking in one that was getting darker by the day. January arrived sharp and cold, the streets glazed in ice, the sky the color of steel. For most, it was a new year. For Tommy, it was supposed to be the beginning of something greater. Word spread that he was finally getting his button, he was about to be made. In our world, that wasn't just a promotion. It was a shield. It meant respect, protection, status. To Tommy, it meant immortality. He walked taller than ever, telling Henry, "Once I'm made, nobody can touch me. Not even the Gambinos." His wife caught the same fire in his voice when he promised her things would change, that the chaos would quiet down, that their future would finally be safe. But in the eyes of the men around him, there was unease. Henry kept his doubts silent. Jimmy stayed poker-faced. Paul Vario said little. In this life, good news often carried a knife hidden in its pocket. The call came on a cold morning. A ceremony, quiet, nothing flashy. Just a house in Queens, a handful of men, the usual ritual. Tommy dressed sharp, pressed suit, polished shoes, hair combed back neat. He was grinning as he slid into the back seat of the car that came for him, cracking jokes like it was his birthday. The men in the front stayed silent. Maybe Tommy noticed, maybe he didn't. Either way, he kept smiling. The house looked ordinary from the outside, faded siding, blinds drawn, no cars in the driveway. Inside, the hallway was narrow, walls yellowed from years of cigarette smoke. Somewhere in the back, a Sinatra song floated soft through the static of a radio. Tommy stepped in, expecting to see chairs set out, a table, the trappings of ceremony. But the room was bare. Just shadows. No setup. No priest, no holy cards. For a second, maybe it clicked. Maybe he realized what was waiting. But before he could turn, the figure in the corner moved. The gun was already raised. The flash lit the room white. One shot, then another, then another. Tommy staggered, then dropped. No speeches, no words, no chance to defend himself. Just quick, businesslike work. The men moved fast. Gloves tightened, surfaces wiped. A tarp spread across the rug. Within minutes, Tommy was bundled, his body stuffed into the trunk of a waiting car. The house looked as ordinary as it had when they arrived. Outside, the neighborhood carried on in silence. Kids played, dogs barked, buses groaned down icy streets. No one looked twice. Later that day, Henry got the word in a call. The voice on the line was vague, but clear enough. Tommy wasn't coming back. When he told Jimmy, Jimmy only muttered, "They got him." Flat. Final. Like he'd been expecting it. Maybe he had. The Gambinos had waited years for Billy Bats. Now their score was settled. The city didn't stop for Tommy. By the next morning, cabs still honked, storefronts opened, bars filled with the smell of whiskey and smoke. Life carried on as if he had never been there at all. But inside our circle, the silence was heavy. At Robert's Lounge, men kept their voices low, heads bent over drinks. nobody wanted to say his name too loud. Jimmy sat in his corner, glass in hand, eyes fixed somewhere far away. When Henry asked, Jimmy muttered only 2 words, "They got him." No anger. No grief. Just fact. For years, Tommy had walked into rooms like a storm, loud, reckless, impossible to ignore. Now, just like that, he was gone. Jimmy seemed almost lighter without him, as if a weight had finally rolled off his shoulders. Tommy had been a weapon, but weapons backfire. He scared enemies, yes, but he also scared friends. With him gone, the gears of business could turn smoother, quieter. In this life, survival mattered more than mourning. The Gambinos didn't hide their satisfaction. Billy Bats had been avenged. A lesson had been carved into the streets: nobody, no matter how feared, was untouchable. Paul Vario said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence told everyone the message had landed. And in back rooms, in smoke-filled bars, men whispered, if they can take Tommy, they can take anyone. Henry felt the weight more than most. He remembered Tommy's grin, the way he bragged about becoming made, the excitement in his voice when he swore the future was his. That same dream had lured him into the trap. It haunted Henry, the idea that in their world, good news wasn't a gift. It was bait. Every step higher brought you closer to the edge. Weeks passed. The Lufthansa money vanished into shadows. The FBI closed in, chasing loose threads. Men disappeared. Some fled, some were buried, some turned rat. And Tommy? His name faded quicker than anyone expected. No funeral, no grave, no marker for his family to visit. Just stories that shifted in the telling, whispers that carried from bar to bar. Yesterday's storm had become today's cautionary tale. But late at night, in the half-empty lounges where the jukebox played slow songs, his ghost lingered. Henry would catch himself waiting for the door to swing open, expecting to hear Tommy's laugh cut through the smoke. But the door stayed closed. The laugh never came. That was the truth of this life. You could burn bright for a while, live loud enough that the city seemed to bend around you. But fire doesn't last. It only leaves smoke behind. Tommy DeSimone's name lived on in stories, in legends, in movies. But the man himself ended the way so many in that world do, gone fast, forgotten faster, Sinatra still playing in the background while the city moved on. If you found this story gripping, hit that like button, subscribe for more untold mafia stories, and drop a comment below. Do you think Tommy's fate was inevitable, or did he light his own fuse?